Hello, welcome back to another episode of Dr. Supercoach YouTube. You're on with Pig Mentality. I'm back to give you my captain recommendations for round 7. By now, you should know where to find me on Twitter at pig_DRSC, in the Dr. Supercoach Slack for our Patreon members, or down in the YouTube comments below. One thing I will ask is if you could subscribe to this YouTube channel if you're enjoying my captain's videos. Let's kind of work our way up to 3,000 subscribers, or let's go for 2,500 first. That'd be a nice little milestone. But yeah, click the subscribe if you're enjoying it, just so you get notified when these come out, and you can never miss a captain's video. But onto the content. So finally, the best 18 weeks are over, and we get to see who had set up their teams well for normal Supercoach scoring. I know there's some coaches that have really benefited from the best 18 and kind of got away with some things, but it'll be interesting now to see who's traded well, who's got the right premiums in, if you got your loopholes set, things like that. So I'm actually anticipating that our West Coast Eagles loophole, Colin Livingston, if you have him or whoever else it is, they're going to start rewarding the owners with their late Sunday games and providing the needed loophole options. So last week, I said that I was worried that many of my premiums weren't really going to be the big scoring captains, and that kind of did turn out to be the case. There were players that went really well last week, and I didn't own that many of them, but I did end up getting on the VC of Zach Butters, which got me a really safe 127 captain score. If that failed, I would have fallen back onto either Sheasel or Flanders, I think, on the Sunday, which both got a 110, but I was able to take Butters' score, so that was kind of irrelevant. This week, I'm not worried about trying to pick a good score out of a bunch of mediocre scores, because Max Gawn is back, and he makes my job a lot easier. So, Vice Captain Max Gawn, end of video, that's it. Time to get on with the housework or whatever else you've been procrastinating from. Not really. Well, kind of. I'm only half joking. Of course, I am here to give you my top 9 tips for the week. And before I do, just remember that the first game of the week is on Wednesday, so don't get caught out. So listen to this video, and then after it, go and fix up your team before the first lockout, because I don't want you kind of thinking it's a Thursday game and then missing some of these VC options. And now we'll get into it. Number 3, vice captain option is Dan Houston. And it's not very often that the Friday night game is actually the 4th game of the round, but that's the case this week. So that makes it a bit strange, a bit of a strange VC plan for Dan Houston. And the reason that he sits in my VC recommendations rather than my captain recommendations is that his name is Dan Houston. So once a symbol of volatility in Supercoach scoring, he'd give you a 150 one week and back it up with a 60 the next. Dan's actually been fairly consistent this year. His 3 lowest scores have been a 105, a 106 and a 108. But having said that, a 105 captain score would really annoy us. So that's kind of why I feel like I'd be more comfortable with the VC on him. So that's currently his floor. But let's have a look at his ceiling. Dan scored 141 last week against Collingwood, and they're kind of roughly middle of the pack in terms of giving up points to opposition defenders over the last 5 games. So he managed a 141 against, not that easy a matchup. This week he plays St Kilda, who are the 4th easiest matchup for wingers and attacking defenders, which is Dan Houston. They are the easiest matchup for opposition designated kickers, which is Dan Houston. So this is a perfect matchup for someone of his play style. The Saints are probably the best team for, that kind of running halfback flanker designated kicker. So I expect this to be one of Houston's spike scores. His floor is why we don't captain him, but his ceiling is why we absolutely should consider vice captaining him. So I think Dan Houston's a great vice captain if you don't have either of the next 2, because I put them above him. Number 2, Christian Petracca. Truck comes into this game after a roller coaster of a past month, 2 scores under 100 and 2 scores over 140. I think this game should be closer to the latter than the former. Richmond's the 2nd easiest matchup for inside midfielders over the last 5 games, and Christian is one of the best inside midfielders in the competition. He scored 141 on the Tigers at the end of last year, and that was when they had a healthier list than they do now. So injuries to the majority of Richmond's midfield have left them vulnerable in the engine room, and I expect Petracca to take advantage on Wednesday night. I've seen many coaches actually trading in Petracca this week, despite him still having a very large break-even. And they're doing that because they have the intention of vice-captaining him. And I don't think he'll let them down. So I think he's a really, really great option against Richmond. But my number one VC who I think is a better option is Max Gawn. So Max is averaging 132 SuperCoach points this season. Max hasn't gone below 113 since round 1. Max has scored over 162 twice. Max scored 174 last year against Richmond. And I missed Max when he was on the bye last week. But Max is back. So yes, all of those points are valid. And they are reasons why Max Gawn should be in your VC consideration for this weekend. But the real reason that Gawn is my number one VC recommendation this week is because of the Richmond matchup. So, as I said, Gawn scored 174 on the Tigers last year, but that was against Ivan Soldo with no Nankervis, so that score is a little bit misleading. I don't think you can read fully into that. What isn't misleading is the scores that Nankervis has given up to his ruck opponents in 2024. So De Koning scored 118, Grundy scored 114, Rowan Marshall scored 147 against Nankervis recently, and even Bailey Williams scored an 85, which is above his season average. So they've all had big days against Nang so far this year. Additionally, Richmond's midfield is getting thoroughly destroyed most weeks. I just talked about how injured they were with Petracca. And we know that Max Gawn is more than just a tap ruckman. He gets a lot of his points from getting contested possessions and clearances himself. I do think this could be one of those giant Max Gawn games, and I would not want to miss having a chance to VC it. So Max is my number one vice-captain recommendation. We then go into my point of difference recommendation. This guy can be used as either a VC or a C. I'm pretty confident in him, and that is Sam Walsh. So I'm going to say that Sam is back, or at least he's dominated his first 2 games. He's been playing a lot of inside midfield without Adam Chera in the team, and that's seen Walsh average 148 through his first 2 games of 2024. I don't expect those numbers to continue for the rest of the year, but they could at least continue for one more round. This week, Carlton play against Geelong. Geelong have actually been the easiest matchup for inside midfielders over the last 5 games. They've given up scores of 128 to Matt Crouch, 120 to Rory Laird, 148 to James Worpel, 155 to Libba, and 147 to Bont in those last 5 games. They've also given up 130 points to Dane Zorko and 157 to Harry Sheasel in the past fortnight. They're defenders rather than inside midfielders, but it does indicate to me that those super fit midfielders who push back into the defence can probably also rack up against the Cats, and that's what we know Sam Walsh does. So this one will be a very unique V or C. Sam is now up to 25% owned by the competition, but at the stage of recording, only 4% have looked at him with a VC or C. I expect that to change as we get a bit closer this weekend, but I think if you're trading in Sam Walsh or you already own him, I think this is a really nice option to VC or C him kind of against the grain. Then we go to my captains. There are a couple of guys unlucky to miss here I'll touch on. Matt Rowell I really considered against the Eagles, but the Eagles have actually, surprisingly, been one of the hardest matchups over the last 5 games for those in and under grunt midfielders. The Eagles have given up points to a lot of players, but those inside tough midfielders are really actually struggling against kind of Yo and Reid and Jinby. They're kind of limiting them a bit. I think Rowell will still be fine, but they're not really giving up the big spike scores, so I'm not going with him. I did consider Nick Dacos as well. Dacos will be very popular, especially with the more casual fans. But, Essendon have actually been a really hard matchup for inside midfielders this year. Plus, they've got Caldwell and Durham, which have done tagging jobs in the last 2 weeks. So, like Durham tagged Bont, and then Caldwell tagged Libba against the Dogs. So they do have 2 guys that they could throw at Dacos. I don't know if they will. I think the Bombers will probably just go head-to-head with Collingwood, but there is that risk that Dacos could be tagged, so that's kind of scared me off him a little bit. And when I am looking at captains, I do want this kind of safety of 120 and avoid the tag. So as we go now, number 5, My number 5 captain option is Rowan Marshall. And Rowan is coming off an absolutely putrid game, but I really expect him to bounce back. Mainly because of the matchup. So like most SuperCoach stars, Marshall loves playing at Adelaide Oval. He averages 110 at that venue from his 6 career games, including 131 and 123 in his last 2 trips. Rowan's last 3 matchups with Port Adelaide are also delightful reading, having scored 159, 127 and 132 on them in recent history. It does need to be said that in those games his primary ruck opponents were Bryn Teakle, Scott Lycett and Scott Lycett again. So that's not an accurate representation of a matchup with Ivan Soldo. The last time we had a Marshall versus Soldo battle was round 22 of last year, and Marshall scored a 146. But again, that data's a bit flawed because Toby Nankervis was actually the main ruck and Soldo was just playing backup. So we don't really have much data on just a 1v1 Marshall versus Soldo. So the best way we probably should look at this is what Soldo has given up to premium ruckman this year. So Soldo's been the main ruckman for Port. So when premium ruckman have played him this year, what were their scores? Nankervis scored a 96 on him in round 2. That's probably a bit below what we would expect. Gawn monstered him for a 177 in round 3. I remember I got onto that one and was recommending that one hard because of the Soldo matchup. Darcy Cameron got him for a 110 last weekend, so that's pretty good from Darcy. Although he did really limit Luke Jackson the other week as well. So I've got to admit, I'm finding Soldo a bit of a hard matchup to read this year. I know last year I was kind of targeting Richmond when Soldo was the main ruck, but he's limited some people, he's got destroyed by some people, so I'm not certain on what Soldo gives up yet. So I'm looking forward to getting more data on Soldo, but for now, I think we can just rely on the fact that Gawn destroyed Soldo in round 3 and that most SuperCoach ruckmen, including Rowan Marshall, love playing at Adelaide Oval. So I think this one is one we can chalk up to a safe 120 score for Rowan. Number 4, we go to Zach Merrett. So Zach started the year as well as any midfielder. He hasn't dropped below 108 all season, and he still managed to score 109 last week against Adelaide, and that was despite being tagged in the second half, and he went and played a lot more forward. The only thing that seems to slow Merrett down this year is a tag, and this week he plays against Collingwood, who generally don't run a tagger. Adding to that, this is a famous Anzac Day clash. It's potentially the biggest game of Essendon's 2024 season, and one that they really should have won it last year, but they let it slip in the final quarter. So they'll be coming out angry from that. Zach actually didn't play in that game, but he certainly was watching on, and I expect a revved up Essendon captain to lead from the front and do everything he can to avenge last year's capitulation. Merrett has scores of 133, 133 and 123 in his last 3 matchups with the Magpies, and I don't see any reason why this matchup should be any different. I think this is a really safe captaincy choice. If you go one of the early Melbourne VCs and for some reason it doesn't work, I think Zach's a great fallback. My number 3 captain recommendation is Sam Flanders. It's actually the first time Sam's made my list. After I put the video out last week, I did a bit more research for my own team and thought, Sam could be a nice fallback against the Swans, and he was kind of okay. But I really, really like this matchup he has this week. So Flanders has had a very consistent start to the year in 2024. He has a season average of 118 and a 3-round average of 117. Sam's moved to the back line in the past 3 games, and he's been Gold Coast's main distributor from defence. He scored 110 last week against Sydney in that role, and that actually should have been a lot more, except he turned the ball over quite a bit due to the Swans' tough pressure. I'm expecting him to have an easier go at it against the Eagles. West Coast are the easiest matchup for general defenders, and the second easiest matchup for attacking defenders over the last 5 games. So I expect Sam to be able to rack up the ball like he does and be able to hit targets without much pressure in this game. So much like Jordan Clark, 115, Dan Rioli, 116, and Nick Blakey, 138. Much like those guys have done in the same role in recent weeks, I think this looks like a really safe 115 score just based on role alone. but it has the potential to be a big spikes game for stupid sexy Flanders. I just think he's a lot higher quality than those three names I've mentioned. He racks it up a lot more, so yeah, I think this is a very safe fullback captain, but there's a potential to be even bigger. Number 2, Marcus Bontempelli. So the Bont, he did bounce back with a good captain game last week, as we kind of predicted. He bounced back with a good captain game and the win. That's important. This matchup, it's a bit of an interesting one from a numbers perspective actually here. On one hand, Marcus averages 132 in his last 3 games against Freo, and he has a really nice track record at Optus Stadium. But on the other hand, Freo have become a much harder matchup for inside midfielders than they were last year. I have to still back in the Bont for a decent captain score. We're talking about Harley Reid and Zach Butters have both gone over 130 against the Dockers in the last fortnight, so it isn't impossible. This is a matchup where I expect kind of a nice, safe 120 to 135 from Bont on Saturday. I'm not really expecting one of his giant scores just because Freo have been a bit more restrictive, but I'm pretty confident it'll be a safe fullback captain option. Then number 1, my number 1 captain option here, we go to Isaac Heeney. So Heeney's actually never scored a SuperCoach ton against Hawthorn in his career. He's played them 9 times for a top score of 93, but I'm very confident that changes this week. Hawthorn have been a very easy matchup for inside midfielders this season. They're currently ranked 4th as the 4th easiest matchup. They actually were just, until the data got updated, they were the easiest matchup, but North didn't do anything to them, and that kind of skewed that a bit. So Hawthorn are very, very easy. Here are some of the numbers that people have put up against Hawthorn this year. So Merrett scored a 127, Archie Perkins scored a 124, Christian Petracca scored a 146, Jordan De Goey scored a 138, Tom Mitchell managed a 119, Noah Anderson scored a 155, Matt Rowell scored a 135, and Tuke Miller scored a 133. So that's just in the last 5 games, some inside mids that have absolutely destroyed Hawthorn. And Heeney is arguably in better form than all of those players in 2024. I think at this stage, Heeney's probably still winning the Brownlow medal race, so you could make an argument he's the best midfielder in the league. I'm not necessarily going to argue either for or against that, but this recommendation is purely a case of captaining one of the best midfielders in the league against one of the worst teams in the league. I think this one could be a bloodbath. I'm really excited for this Heeney matchup. So for me, I'm very, very confident in a Max Gawn ceiling game this week. I actually think it could be one of his highest scores of the year, and I think he will be my highest scorer on my team. So he's going to get my VC. If he does fail, I'm very confident falling back on an Isaac Heeney captaincy, which I also think will be a big score. So I'm pretty confident both of those go big. Just a final reminder that we do have a Wednesday game this week. So now that you've listened to this, make sure you've subscribed to this channel. Let's get over 2,500 subs and go jump on SuperCoach now and set your teams. This is your reminder to do that. Best of luck this weekend. And as I've said before, you can find me on Twitter, pig_DRSC. If you're in the Dr. SuperCoach Slack, hit me up. I'll always answer questions, or comment down in the comments below and I'll get back to you.